I knew something was off the moment Lexi started bringing those industrial-strength scented candles into HR, like she was trying to mask the smell of bullshit with autumn cinnamon swirl. But that morning, I was just doing what I always did. Sitting at my desk in a windowless room with two dead plants, a fluorescent light that hummed like it hated me personally, and a neatly packed Tupperware of tuna salad with wheat crackers and an apple slice wedged between. Nothing fancy, no garlic, no leeks, just lunch. It was 12:04 p.m. when I took the first bite. I remember because I just timestamped a compliance note in the vendor intake log, and I'm nothing if not precise. That's the whole job: track every thread, document every whisper, make sure nothing Alaris Point does triggers a breach with the feds. I was the ghost in the system. Lady no one noticed until a subaward went south, and suddenly everyone remembered I existed. I didn't mind it. Invisible meant no birthday cakes or forced smiles in the break room. Invisible meant I could do the real work. By the time I finished my apple slice, I'd already flagged an untracked invoice escalation in one of our subcontractor chains. I logged it, assigned a risk tag, sent a ping to legal. Subject: urgent, still waiting on 47C clearance form signature for grantor audit. No one replied. Of course they didn't. That form had been sitting in limbo for 13 business days. Meanwhile, Alaris Point was busy plastering glossy slides about cross-functional transparency to the executive monitors while the actual compliance officer, me, couldn't get a damn acknowledgement. Still, I did what I always did. Kept records, stayed quiet, ate my lunch. Speaking of quiet, if you've made it this far and haven't subscribed yet, maybe hit that button. More than 90% of people who listen to these stories forget to, and it really helps the team keep churning out these corporate train wrecks. Also, maybe toss us a like. Think of it as hazard pay for surviving HR horror stories. Anyway, where was I? Ah, yes. Tuna salad, forgotten form, and the beginning of the end. I didn't even hear Lexi approach. She moved like a damn cat in those orthopedic wedges, all self-righteous posture and too much peppermint lip gloss. She leaned over the cubicle wall like a vulture that read lean in once and took it personally. You do know this isn't a cafeteria, right? I blinked. Excuse me? She pointed at my lunch like I'd just microwaved roadkill. Health code violation. We have protocols. I stared at her, genuinely confused. I'm not cooking. I'm eating. She smiled, tight-lipped and rehearsed. Still, we don't want to encourage unsanitary behavior. Come see me in HR when you're done digesting. Digesting? Was I a snake? I wiped my mouth, closed my Tupperware, and followed her down the hallway. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I'd seen that walk before, back when they cut our operations lead for poor hallway decorum. That man tripped once over a printer cord. HR room smelled like Bath and Body Works and misplaced authority. She had a folder waiting. My name was already printed on the front. Typed, bold. Lexi sat, smoothed her skirt, and delivered the kind of speech that had clearly been practiced in the mirror. Due to repeated violations of workspace hygiene policies and failure to adhere to internal meal protocols, we're terminating your employment effective immediately. My mind blanked. What repeated violations? Lexi blinked slowly like I was a dumb child in need of guidance. You've been eating at your desk for months. I've had reports. From who? The skeleton in accounting who talks to his stapler? But I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't do the walk of shame. I nodded, signed the form, and stood. On the way out, I stopped by the break room. That's when I saw it. Taped to the wall above the coffee machine, next to the expired birthday bagels Wednesday sign, was my photo. Black and white printout from my badge. Someone had scrawled across it in red marker, terminated unauthorized eating, do not rehire. I stared at it for 10 full seconds, not because I was shocked, but because the absurdity almost made me laugh. It looked like a damn wanted poster from a dystopian comedy. All because I ate lunch where I worked, because I didn't perform compliance with enough team culture sparkle. I walked out. I didn't take my monitor cactus. I didn't look back. But as I stepped into the elevator, I pulled out my phone and forwarded one email to my personal inbox. Subject: Unresolved Risk Memo Grantor Dependency Attachment. Routing Chain Form 47C, unsigned. No one at Alaris Point realized it yet, but that one unsigned form was about to tear open their entire pipeline. And the woman they just fired over a sandwich? She wasn't just a compliance officer. She was the named monitor on 6 federal contracts. And now they were in breach. Lexi moved fast, like someone trying to make up for a lifetime of being ignored at middle school lunch tables. Within 45 minutes of the cafeteria comment, I was called to HR with all the subtlety of a fire drill. They didn't even let me finish processing the passive-aggressive threat, just a Teams ping from her assistant with the subject line: Immediate HR sit-down workspace hygiene concern. I walked down the beige hallway, past the motivational posters. Integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching, which felt extra funny in a building where IT actively watched our keystrokes. The door to HR was already open. Lexi sat there like she was holding court in a courtroom made entirely of discount laminate and weaponized lavender oil. She slid a folder across the desk without a word. I opened it. My own name, my own job title, a document already filled out. Jennifer Lynn Ortig a final notice of termination. Reason, health code violation, unauthorized meal consumption in non-designated area. I blinked. Is this a joke? Lexi smiled like a woman who learned everything she knows about power from Real Housewives reunion specials. This has been reported multiple times. Repeated noncompliance can't be ignored. Lexi, I eat a sandwich at my desk while tagging risk memos. That's the whole violation? She clicked her pen twice like she was daring me to argue. There are procedures, Jennifer. Food belongs in the break room, not in federal audit logs. I almost laughed. Almost. There's no food in the audit logs. Just my audit notes, which I might add were up to date on every single contract, including the ones legal still hasn't cleared, like 47C. Her eyes narrowed. Jennifer, this isn't about documentation. This is about culture. We've been tasked with creating a workplace standard. Clean, professional, structured. Structured, I echoed. You mean like firing someone without a single verbal warning? She leaned forward just slightly. You signed the handbook. Of course I did. On day one, right between the unpaid overtime clause and the company mugs must be returned upon exit section. Lexi didn't want to hear about audit logs or clause language. She wanted a scalp. Mine just happened to be within reach. I stared down at the termination form, checked the date, signed it. You'll be escorted out shortly, she said, rising. Someone will box up your belongings. As I stood, she added, just to be clear, this wasn't personal. Right. Nothing says impersonal like publicly crucifying a woman over crackers and tuna. When I walked past the coffee station, it was already there. My badge photo, printed on a sheet of cheap copy paper, scotch-taped to the wall. Scrawled in red ink across my face were the words, terminated unauthorized eating. Do not rehire. Someone had even drawn a frown under my chin. I guess professionalism now included office doodles. A few employees stared at it, then at me. One guy from finance actually chuckled. Another whispered, Jesus. I didn't flinch, I just kept walking. Humiliation only works if you accept it. I had no intention of making this easy for them. I took the elevator down alone. The whole ride felt like a bad dream, one where the rules change mid-scene and no one tells you. 8 years of spotless records, 0 flags, 4 promoted grant cycles, and now I was a footnote on Lexi's zero-tolerance spreadsheet. A punchline. In the lobby, I paused by the revolving door. I opened my phone, pulled up my sent folder, and tapped out one last message to my personal account. Subject, internal routing chain unresolved risk memo, grantor dependency attachments, all 6 compliance logs from my active named monitor contracts, including the unsigned Form 47C. I hit send. Then I walked out, past the security guard who didn't meet my eye, past the receptionist who was suddenly too interested in her keyboard. I didn't take my mug. I didn't take my stapler. But I took one truth with me, heavy in my chest. Lexi didn't just fire a mid-level compliance officer. She fired the only person authorized to oversee the active federal audit trail on 6 major contracts. And the moment my name stopped appearing in their system, Alaris Point became non-compliant, retroactively, indisputably, irrevocably. They just didn't know it yet. The silence hit hardest once the apartment door clicked shut behind me. It was that cheap kind of quiet you only get in a one-bedroom with thin walls and neighbors who whisper louder than they talk. I dropped my tote bag onto the floor, still full of the personal items HR hadn't gotten to. My desk cactus, a novelty mug that said Data Witch, and the tuna sandwich they let me keep, as if that somehow balanced the humiliation. I didn't sit down right away. Just stood there staring at nothing, jacket still on, watching a dust mote spin in the slant of late afternoon sun like it was mocking me. 8 years, no fanfare, not even a cardboard box with my name on it, just a pink slip and a smile from someone who smelled like mall perfume and power hunger. I walked to my tiny kitchen, unwrapped the sandwich, and took a bite. It tasted like revenge, or maybe just mayo. Either way, I chewed slowly, deliberately, letting the act of eating feel like protest. Then I opened my laptop. There's a folder on my desktop most people at Alaris Point didn't know existed. Hell, most people at Alaris Point didn't know I existed. I called it Offsite Audit Full Archive. Inside were subfolders of every contract I'd ever touched, every risk flag I'd filed, every email chain they thought got lost in the shuffle of daily operations. I didn't keep it because I didn't trust the company. I kept it because the company never once gave me a reason to. I clicked into the most recent grant. A monster subcontract worth $160 million, flagged as high sensitivity due to Department of Energy funding. My eyes scanned the metadata, looking for the file I knew was buried in there somewhere. Grantor Clauses Federal Oversight Rev 6. PDF found it. I opened the document and Control+F named monitor. 4 hits. The third one stopped me cold. Clause 17B, disqualification triggers if during the active contract cycle, the named monitor is terminated, reassigned, or otherwise removed for reasons including, but not limited to, internal misconduct, oversight breach, or failure to comply with company code of conduct. The grant shall be considered immediately non-compliant and subject to suspension of federal funds pending independent review. There was my name, in bold, right there in the company-submitted appendix. Jennifer Lynn Ortega named monitor, subaward line 7C Delta. My breath didn't catch. My hands didn't shake. Not this time, because the sting of betrayal had already faded. Now there was only clarity. By citing internal misconduct, Lexi's phrasing, not mine, they had flagged me under a high-risk clause without realizing it. That one little HR checkbox had just tripped a $160 million wire. Retroactively. Alaris Point wasn't just at risk of losing a grant. They'd already lost it. They just hadn't done the math yet. The only thing keeping that audit line alive was me, my credentials, my signature, my clearance. And they cut me out over a goddamn sandwich. The more I read, the clearer it became. The moment they filed that termination notice and classified it as policy violation, they handed the grantor everything it needed to launch a compliance review. Not a delay, not a warning. A full-blown contractual breach. I pulled up the company org chart on my phone, just to confirm. The new compliance officer, Craig something, had only been on board for 3 weeks. No federal credentials, no monitor clearance, no audit history, which meant that right now, on paper, there was no one legally holding oversight on 6 active federal subcontracts. Which also meant, per Clause 17b, they were operating in violation. A phrase surfaced in my mind like an echo from some training webinar long ago: automatic disqualification upon named monitor removal without compliant reassignment. I closed the PDF, sat back, took another bite of that sandwich like it was victory itself. All these years, I'd tiptoed around execs who didn't know my name, fixed errors that weren't mine, triple-checked vendor logs so some SVP could take credit for clean audit cycles in his quarterly deck. And the one time I ate lunch at my desk like a human being, they tried to erase me from the building. But compliance doesn't care about breakroom politics. It cares about signatures. Timestamps, names on paper, and mine just became the most dangerous name in the entire Alaris Point directory. They wanted me gone? Fine. They just didn't think about what would follow me out the door. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of nerves, but because my brain was chewing on the kind of precision that kept me up like black coffee. For 8 years, I documented every deviation, logged every internal delay, followed every breadcrumb of compliance failure to its source. I knew what would happen next at Alaris Point. Not if when. The only unknown now was, who else knew what I knew? At 6:47 a.m., I booted my laptop. No Slack messages, no Teams pings, just the calm of a desktop without corporate spyware for the first time in years. I brewed coffee, sat cross-legged on the couch in yesterday's blouse, and opened a fresh draft in Proton Mail. 2. Secure contracts at Gov Grantor Agency Gov subject. Oversight roster inquiry subaward line 7C Delta. Good morning. I wanted to confirm whether any updates are required to the oversight roster currently filed for subaward 7C Delta. I was previously listed as the named monitor. Best, Jennifer Ortega. It was short, neutral, purposefully vague. No accusations, no alarms, just a tickle to the system to see who flinched first. I sent it, stared at the blinking cursor for a few seconds, then closed the lid and got dressed. No sense pacing around like a character in a legal drama. Real fallout doesn't happen in explosive courtroom monologues. It unfolds through inboxes and timestamps. At 9:12 a.m., I heard the chime, one line, from Secure Contracts at Gov Grantor Agency Gov subject, Oversight Roster Inquiry Subaward Line 7C Delta. You're not on the clearance sheet anymore. That was it. Not even a dear Miss Ortega, just the cold confirmation of what I already knew. I cracked my knuckles, opened a reply, and typed, correct. That's now a breach per Clause 17b, line 1. I added a second sentence, purely for effect. No formal transition or compliant reassignment has occurred to date. My last day with Alaris Point was yesterday, terminated under internal misconduct designation. Click, sent. I sat there for a moment, watching my reflection in the black screen. This wasn't vindictive, this was arithmetic. A clause plus a trigger equals a consequence, and I wasn't going to lift a finger to stop it, but I wasn't going to sit still either. It took less than 20 minutes to draft the necessary filings. I'd started the paperwork weeks ago, just a backup plan back then, in the same way a parachute is a just-in-case for people dumb enough to jump out of planes. Now it was my lifeline. Jennifer Ortega, LLC Right Arrow, officially renamed to Audit Nest Services. Filed in D.C. with active EIN, limited services tag, and a registered statement. Audit Nest Services is not presently affiliated with Alaris Point Inc. and holds no contractual obligations to said entity as of the termination date 10/16. I uploaded a scanned copy of my badge cut in half and attached the PDF confirming federal clearance suspension due to loss of named monitor status. And then, as the final stroke, I opened a new message. Different inbox this time, one I hadn't touched in a while. To M. Miranda at Alaris LegalCom BCC, my personal archive, subject, Clause 17b, line 1, no body text. Just the subject line, because Miranda would know. She was the one who flagged Clause 17B with me 2 years ago during a late-night compliance mapping marathon. Back when legal still had humans and not just culture alignment specialists. She was sharp, quiet, underappreciated like the rest of us. And crucially, she hated HR's power plays. I stared at the screen for a long time before hitting send. That was my version of tossing a lit match into a dry haystack, not to start a fire, but to make sure no one could pretend they didn't see the smoke later. Then I shut my laptop, exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours, and finally stood up. I wasn't Jennifer Ortega from Alaris Point anymore. I was now the founder of a federally registered audit consulting firm with no conflict of interest and the full digital footprint of Alaris Point's mistake. Funny thing about the people who build the scaffolding, no one sees them until it all collapses. And when it does, they're the only ones with a map of where the bolts were missing. The first crack came not from a phone call or formal notice, but from a breadcrumb buried deep in a shared drive, an access log ping from the grantor side that hit Alaris Point server like a cold slap in a warm boardroom. The liaison had run a routine audit cross-check, something banal, maybe checking document version controls, maybe syncing form submission timestamps. Doesn't matter. What mattered is that the clearance certificate tied to subaward 7C Delta threw a mismatch. Clearance, expired, monitor, removed, status, unresolved. At 7:41 a.m., Alaris Point's compliance servers logged 5 separate requests from the grantor's digital portal. Then the messages started piling in. Request, confirm oversight continuity. Request, identify replacement named monitor. Request, submit incident response explanation. The coup, Franklin Marlowe, who wore khakis like they were armor, got wind around 10 a.m. He was in the middle of a culture huddle when someone from legal leaned in, whispering something that made the color drop out of his face like a glitch in a Zoom filter. By 10:07, Franklin had canceled his next 2 meetings and scheduled a full internal audit. Immediate, full scope, cross-departmental, all hands. New compliance officer, Craig, wasn't ready. That's not an insult, that's just math. He'd only been on the job for 25 days, hadn't even finished onboarding, still referred to SharePoint as that folder thing. Now he was staring down 6 major subcontracts with a risk ledger that still had my name stamped on every line. 6 contracts, $160 million, 1 missing clearance. He scrambled, checked archived approvals, tried to cross-reference my access logs. The problem was, the logs didn't lie, and neither did the audit trail because I built them. At 10:19, an internal Slack thread leaked from the compliance leadership channel. Screenshot attached to a burner Reddit post. Thread title, who removed the named monitor before audit closure? It got worse from there. One comment, wait, why is she still listed on the Do Energy ledger? Another, someone call legal. This is a Clause 17 violation. And another, more desperate, we have an audit window open in 11 business days. Fix this. By 11:30, someone tried to call me. Blocked number. I didn't answer. They didn't leave a voicemail. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee from the data witch mug I'd rescued from HR's emotional purge, watching the storm swirl from a safe distance. I didn't have to lift a finger. I'd already done all the work. Months ago, when I was still invisible. Back when they thought compliance was just a checkbox, a formality, something they could decorate with pastel posters about integrity and then ignore when inconvenient. Now the risk register, the very system I'd spent the better part of my career building, was turning on them. Because risk doesn't forget. Risk doesn't care about company happy hours or zero-tolerance PR slogans. Risk follows the paper trail, and that trail still led to me. Across town, Franklin was pacing. Craig was drowning. Lexi was likely in a corner office crafting a LinkedIn post about leadership through adversity. But none of them had the clearance. None of them had the clause knowledge. None of them had the internal routing logs that tied every single unresolved memo, every single dangling 47C form, back to a person who no longer worked there. I did, and I wasn't calling anyone back. Not yet. Let them sweat. Let them scroll back through 8 years of emails trying to find where they lost control of the story. Because the funny thing about being invisible all those years, no one thought to check if the ghost kept receipts. The letter hit Alaris Point's inbox at 8:04 a.m., subject line, formal oversight clarification request urgent response required. It was addressed to Franklin Marlowe, CC'd to legal, compliance, and grantor relations. 10 lines, cold, precise. Please provide formal explanation for the removal of named monitor Jennifer Ortega from subaward lines 7C Delta through 9B Kilo. Per Clause 17B of the grant agreement, monitor transition requires compliant clearance and disclosure. Failure to provide compliant justification within 48 hours will result in status change to high-risk entity and subsequent funding action. Franklin panicked. Craig folded. Lexi went silent. By noon, the legal response had been drafted, revised, stripped of liability, and sent. It was the kind of language designed by people who think contracts are riddles and rules are optional. The removal of Miss Ortega was the result of a procedural internal HR action, unrelated to grant performance. No misconduct was related to federal oversight duties, even threw in a paragraph about culture reform and standardizing workplace behavior expectations. Somewhere in legal, someone must have high-fived themselves. At 4:42 p.m., the agent replied, "Understood. To clarify, the monitor was terminated for eating a sandwich at her desk. As per Clause 17b, this constitutes internal misconduct during active audit cycle. Effective immediately. Subaward lines 7C Delta through 9B Kilo are now subject to federal fund freeze pending investigation." That was it. No back and forth, no appeals, just a $40 million pipeline, frozen like a deer in HR's headlights. And somewhere in a fluorescent-lit office, Lexi probably learned that her badge didn't carry the same weight outside the building. I was sitting at a co-working space off H Street in DC when the message came through. Not from Alaris Point, they still hadn't dared contact me directly, but from a friend at the grantor's technical team. One line in Signal, they flinched. I didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in it, just inevitability, like watching a train switch tracks because you moved the lever 2 days ago. By then my paperwork was done. Audit Nest Services LLC registered, sealed live. EIN issued. Federal Systems Registration complete. Legal structure built with redundancies, clauses, and protections I'd never been allowed to implement back at Alaris Point. That night, I met with a subcontractor working under a parallel DOE grant. We talked over quiet drinks at a rooftop bar while the Capitol Dome glowed faint behind us. He asked me about oversight integrity models, audit reconciliation timelines, and monitor risk thresholds. Never once mentioned sandwiches. At 9:03 p.m., signed a confidentiality agreement with them. A 6-month engagement. Full-scope audit assistance, high-trust clearance. 5 figures to start. When I got home, I changed into an old hoodie, sat cross-legged on the floor, and stared at the only remaining photo from my time at Alaris Point. A team picture from 3 years ago. I wasn't in it. They'd forgotten to include me. And now they'd remember. Not because I made noise, but because I documented silence. Because I tagged every risk they ignored. Because I warned them quietly, dutifully for years. Because I ate my lunch at my desk while doing the job no one wanted to understand. They fired the ghost. And the ghost rewrote the ledger. Not out of anger anymore, just precision. They thought they could bury me. But compliance is like soil, it doesn't forget what you plant in it. And what Alaris Point planted was a mess of shortcuts, arrogance, and the kind of paperwork rot that smells worse the deeper you dig. The grantor's pre-audit inquiry landed 3 days after the freeze. A soft knock before the storm. The kind of inquiry that doesn't ask if something went wrong, it asks how long you've been lying about it. The very first question, please provide documentation of monitor transition following Miss Ortega's departure. Silence, then scrambling. Craig, the newly crowned compliance officer, pulled every version control log, every cleared form, every Slack message he could find. The problem was the system didn't lie. I'd built it not to, and what it said clearly, repeatedly, was that no transition had occurred, no reassignment, no coverage memo, no credentialed replacement logged into the system after me, which meant every contract they touched since my termination was radioactive. And then came the internal audit. Franklin, the coup, sat at the head of the glass conference room table with legal, finance, and 2 audit consultants who looked like they'd been pulled out of a forensic accounting documentary. They walked through the oversight trail line by line. And line by line, it led back to me. Every unresolved flag, every missing Form 47, every incomplete clearance packet, all documented, all time-stamped, all traceable to my audit logs. One by one, the consultants printed them out and slid them across the table like evidence at a trial. And at the bottom of every sheet, in a quiet footer they probably never noticed before, was my name, Ortega J. /flagdrisk/internal view. Only Franklin allegedly muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. But HR went on the offensive. Lexi scheduled an emergency town hall. That the company stood by its decision, and that cultural integrity matters just as much as compliance. She framed my termination as part of a larger initiative to foster consistency in workplace behavior. She never said my name, but she didn't have to, because someone leaked the photo. It showed up first on the internal message board, then spread like a wildfire through Signal threads and private LinkedIn groups. A black and white printout of my badge photo. Red marker across the top, terminated unauthorized eating. Bottom corner, do not rehire. The caption added by whoever posted it. This you, Lexi? That was the match. The replies ignited. Pretty sure that lunch just cost us $40 million. Do not rehire the only person who kept us compliant. Bold strategy. She warned you, you laughed. Now we're a case study. It didn't stop there. Someone dug up an old Slack exchange where I'd reminded legal about the 47C form. Someone else found an internal wiki note I'd written titled Clause 17b, read before you screw it up. It had exactly 3 views before my termination. Now, it was trending company-wide. Lexi tried damage control. Posted a follow-up. Compliance is everyone's responsibility. Someone responded with a screenshot of my risk tracker and wrote, "Yeah, it used to be her actual job." Meanwhile, I was in my apartment barefoot, eating leftover pad thai straight from the carton while watching the collapse unfold like a time-lapse demolition video. That's when I got the letter. Not an email, a letter. Real envelope, stamped. From a grantor liaison I used to work with on subaward mapping. The kind of guy who never used emojis and once corrected my clause formatting with a red pen at a dinner event. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, left justified, with my name at the top. "Jennifer, they tried to explain it away like you were a liability. Should have known better. Next time, they should have asked what you were eating." I read it twice. Then folded it neatly and slid it into the drawer with my badge shards and the last printed version of my audit ledger. No rage, no gloating. Just the quiet truth. I hadn't burned Alaris Point down. It built their house on paper and tossed a match at it the moment they decided lunch mattered more than law. The air in Alaris Point's boardroom that morning could have sliced open a watermelon. 10 men and women in tailored suits sat bolt upright like nervous schoolchildren, all pretending they weren't terrified of the quiet man at the end of the table, the federal agent in the gray jacket with the binder no one could stop glancing at. Lexi had dressed for the occasion. Charcoal blazer, conservative pearls, hair sprayed into a helmet of composure. She smiled like a politician and spoke with rehearsed precision, every syllable coded in artificial confidence. You could almost hear the LinkedIn post forming in her head. "We have, and continue to uphold, a zero-tolerance policy regarding behavioral infractions in the workplace," she said. "Our decision to terminate Miss Ortega was not about performance, but professionalism. Public food violations set a precedent, especially for compliance roles. Public food violations." She made it sound like I'd stood on a table and flung spaghetti at the ceiling. Someone on the board nodded blankly, trying to read the room. The CFO glanced sideways at legal. Franklin, the coup, drummed one finger silently on his notepad. The agent said nothing for a beat. Just opened the binder with the slow, final confidence of someone holding all the aces. Didn't look at Lexi. He didn't look at anyone, really. Just read. Clause 17B, subsection D. Termination of named monitor during active audit cycle, regardless of internal justification or reason, constitutes immediate breach of federal compliance protocol. Such breach will trigger a mandatory funding freeze and independent oversight review unless pre-cleared succession procedures are documented and verified. He turned the page. Looked up. Miss Ortega's clearance was active at the time of termination. No succession was filed. No reassignment protocol executed. And per your own language, the termination was for internal misconduct, which escalates the breach. He shut the binder with a finality that cracked the room in half. No raised voice. No legalese jousting. Just done. Across the table, the lawyer's pen slipped from his fingers. It hit the table with a soft click and rolled off the edge, clattering to the floor like it knew what was coming. The room was dead quiet. Lexi blinked too fast. Someone's water glass trembled on contact with the wood. The CFO's jaw tightened just slightly, like he was bracing for something he couldn't dodge. Franklin opened his mouth, but nothing came out. A puff of air. Maybe an apology that died on impact. "I assume," the agent continued, "you're familiar with the implications of breach under Subaward 7C Delta." More silence. Then Franklin croaked out, We believed it was a minor HR action. A desk policy issue. We didn't realize you didn't read the contract," the agent said simply. "Or if you did, you didn't respect it." He stood up, folded the binder under his arm, and adjusted his watch like he had 3 more of these implosions to attend before lunch. "Expect a full review team by end of week. You'll receive scheduling instructions within 48 hours. From this point forward, all communications will go through external compliance counsel." And just like that, he walked out. No handshakes, no softening. Just exit, stage left, with the kind of quiet that leaves scars. The board didn't move, not at first. It was as if they were waiting for someone to say it had all been a joke. That the camera crew would pop out and yell gotcha. That the sandwich story wasn't going to cost them tens of millions in frozen federal funds. But it wasn't a joke. It was an audit cycle, and I'd been the only one standing between them and this reckoning. Lexi turned to legal, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we undo it?" The lawyer just shook his head. "We terminated a federally cleared oversight officer for eating lunch. He looked like he was going to be sick." And somewhere, behind a locked door and a deadbolt of their own making, Alaris Point realized that the compliance ghost they erased from the org chart had come back, not with vengeance, but with receipts. The freeze never lifted. 40 million turned into 60 as deeper inspections uncovered just how tangled the oversight had become. Other contracts were flagged. Vendor files were redacted retroactively, and the grantor began sending not emails but notices. Formal ones. Cold, numbered, and impossible to ignore. Alaris Point's funding tap wasn't just pinched, it was cemented shut under federal lock with a public audit schedule pinned to the system like a scarlet letter. The CEO resigned 2 days after the board meeting, for personal reasons. The press release was all buzzwords and no oxygen. No one mentioned the audit. No one needed to. Within hours, his LinkedIn quietly switched to consulting in the private sector. Translation: hiding in shame. Lexi was removed by Friday, not fired, reassigned. That's how HR eats its own quietly with a smile, then slides the plate under the door. No farewell emails, just a revoked badge and the cleaning crew removing framed quotes about excellence through accountability. I never went back, didn't need to. My firm, Audit Services, received the contract offer the following week. Alaris Point was required, by the same grantor that had once trusted them, to onboard an external oversight entity with no prior entanglements. And since I had documented my separation down to the microsecond, I fit the bill like a scalpel fits a wound. The invoice I sent them was a masterpiece of symmetry. $51,450 external oversight retention, net 10, client. Alaris Point Inc., services rendered. Federal compliance resuscitation. There's a particular joy in billing the people who once taped your face to a breakroom wall. Not out of spite, just out of balance. My new office wasn't big. 2 rooms, high windows, dusty sunbeams across an ugly gray carpet, but it was mine. A pot of half-dead succulents sat on the windowsill like skeptical interns, and my assistant's desk faced mine, stocked with color-coded post-its and a candy jar no one ever touched. At 12:01 p.m., I opened my drawer, pulled out a fresh sandwich, turkey, cheddar, mustard on rye, and took a bite. No meetings, no warnings, no laminated behavior charts, just lunch at my desk. Across from me sat a small cardboard box I'd kept sealed since that day. Inside was my old badge from Alaris Point, snapped in half where HR had tried to be dramatic. I'd kept it not for nostalgia, but for the ritual. I reached over, picked it up, flipped it between my fingers once, then dropped it into the shredder beside the filing cabinet. The motor whirred, the plastic screamed, the past disappeared in serrated slivers. A soft knock followed. My assistant leaned in, headset crooked, voice dry. Alaris Point's on line 2. They're asking if you'll take point on their appeal. I chewed, swallowed, wiped my fingers on a napkin, smiled, tell them I'm eating. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.